Southern Oregon Wine Institute at Umpqua Community College. I teach the viticulture sections there. We tend to get into vineyard economics right away because first thing you're going to ask somebody if they're going to be talking to you about plants, and many times the demographic we see in our classes is 18 to 65 with an average age of 42. Why are they there? What are they interested in? Many times they're interested in doing something themselves. Or they've already started a vineyard and they're going to come to me and say, well, what do I do now? I should learn something about this. So as we have these discussions, you're going to need to have this conversation with somebody. You know, what grape variety do I plant? Well, it depends, doesn't it? It's a very good extension answer. It depends. It does depend on so many things. It depends on who's buying your grapes. What variety of grape does your customer want, and what kind of wine will be in high demand for the next 10 to 20 years? So we start this conversation, and I'm required to be able to bring something to this. So I do a little bit of work to try and figure out what things look like. What I'll present today will be discussion about the statewide picture, but it'll be from the Southern Oregon perspective. So maybe that's useful to you as you're looking at what's going on down there. One of the things I found was some of the students who asked me, and were quite receptive about this, would say, what do we know about the total number of acres that are being planted in our state, and how much is bearing, and how many tons actually come to marketplace? That's a squishy answer. I don't think anybody has good data out there. And the USDA and the National Agricultural Statistical Service do what they can with a voluntary survey to come out. I talked to a woman whose family has been growing pears in Medford for 2 generations. They say in all of our other fruit crops, we kind of know what the supply of grapes or the supply of fruit is out there in the marketplace to prevent from oversaturation of that. I don't think we know that quite so well in Oregon or in many other states about where the wine grape supply is. So supply drives a lot of things, including price. We do also have a little bit of data out there that is price driven. This is the 2013 average grape prices per ton. That's a voluntary survey that's sent out to growers, and the responses are collected at Southern Oregon University. There are some gaps in the data. One thing that's very evident, and I let my friends in the Umpqua know, is you're not responding very well here. I really don't think Pinot Noir is the only thing that you're growing in Southern Oregon. So there are going to be gaps in data when you look at responses from a self-selecting group that's going to respond to surveys. But I think we can talk about the gross differences. So some of the gross differences in prices will drive a lot of things about what's going on in the marketplace. If you can't see this adequately, I've got some paper copies you can see. In the Umpqua region, the price for Pinot Noir is $1,893 a ton. The price in the North Willamette is $28.19 per ton. Even if these numbers have significant gaps in them, if that differential exists, that's going to drive a lot of what's going on in the marketplace. What we see in Southern Oregon is if this price differential exists, and it does exist also in the Rogue, you're going to see those that need large quantities of grapes are going to come to a place where the price is adequate for the market they're taking those grapes to, or the wines that are going to go to it. What we do see in Southern Oregon is we see a significant planting. So it's occurred in Roseburg and it's occurred in the Rogue and the Applegate Valley. I suspect this is going to impact overall the state's supply and demand for grapes, and it could influence growers in many cases. But I would suggest that there are really 2 scenarios we look at. One is a large winery's need for grapes and what they're looking at, and then a small producer's needs for grapes. Lacking data, this is some of it, testimonial stuff that I can pick up as I talk to buyers that are coming through, growers that are planting acreage in, and we can see if this relates to what you see. From the supply and demand picture for a large winery point of view, most of the growers would say their Pinot Noir supply is not sufficient. Since they're asking for people to plant grapes in these areas down here, we suspect they need a larger supply of grapes, or more reliable supply of grapes from large acreage that goes in. Pinot Noir price is too high in some parts of Oregon, and that price differential is going to drive buyers to places where they're going to look at other pricing and figure out whether the quality differences are significant enough for them to hesitate or whether they're going to change and move towards lower priced grapes. Pinot Noir sales are growing nationally for the state of Oregon. A lot of wine leaving the state of Oregon says Oregon Pinot Noir, wherever it's grown in Oregon. And then Pinot Gris is still needed by a few large wineries. So we see growers in our area who are approached by buyers that are looking for Pinot Gris. But I would confine my discussion to those points about the large winery demand piece. From the small winery demand piece, and maybe this is just a Southern Oregon viewpoint on it, that premium fruit is always going to be needed. If you grow good fruit, and we tell students this all the time, you will always find a home for good fruit. If you're not growing good fruit or you're on the margin of it, this is where you may be going to have to ask yourself where you're going with your fruit. The varieties needed can vary. So we see grapes like Tempranillo being successful in Southern Oregon. If you look back in OSU's historical data of variety selections, one of the things that came out of work that was done in the 80s and 90s was Merlot being a well-suited grape for Southern Oregon. We don't see much of that in the ground, but I don't know who's selling a lot of Merlot in the marketplace now. Maybe if that becomes back in favor, that would be something that would suit down there. But the supply and demand, at least in our area, are about near equilibrium. I don't see wineries pursuing a lot of small growers, and I see small growers not necessarily expanding their acreage because the wineries around them don't ask for that much more grapes. So the difference between the large winery and the small winery picture from what we can see it. Just to give a picture of where Southern Oregon has hit historically from the USDA data, we're taking about 20% of Oregon's production. We have about 20% of Oregon's acreage, 20% of the vineyards, and 15% of the wineries. This is old data. I suspect as the years come, this may change. So generally this leads us to, in the educational sphere, this is leading us to a discussion about what's the labor demand then. If we see production increasing in vineyards in Southern Oregon, where will the people that are going to work in those vineyards coming from? What are they prepared to do when they get there? So I would suggest the state has some good resources for people that need to learn about this. Certainly OSU is world class, and I agree with my colleagues at Chemeketa that their program that's been running for 10 years has produced excellent graduates, many of them down in Southern Oregon. We're trying to catch up with everybody else that's doing this here, but I think a collective effort to decide what does somebody need to know if they're going to be working in these new vineyards, if we're adopting newer techniques, if we're seeing mechanization and other things come, how are they learning how to adopt to those? So I would say one of the things I always come back to when I talk to students is where does the wine industry sit on the world stage? And it's a globally competitive industry. So the consumer that's reaching for that bottle of wine could reach for that same variety of grape in many other places from around the world on the same shelf in Roseburg where they're out there farming. If they can recognize that level of global competitiveness, understand that in many cases, and Michael Porter, who's pretty good about studying global competitiveness in Harvard, says those areas that see the linkages and the successful strengthening of the entire cluster that surrounds the wine industry, those are the ones that are more globally competitive than other areas. So that point of view is where I'm going to leave you with this. We see that in our area the market is warm to even warmer for those that are interested in growing grapes. We see growth in the Oregon wine industry overall. Thanks. And now I'm going to turn it over to Eckhart. But any questions that you have? If not, Eckhart.